During the 19th century, the United States was transformed from an agricultural backwater into the world's foremost industrial nation. Among the factors contributing to this metamorphosis was cheap labor, much of which was provided by immigrants. Shortly before his death in 1872, William Henry Seward was asked if he was troubled by the rise in immigration. Reflecting the optimism of the times, he exclaimed,
"Not a bit of it. Let them come. The more, the better. They dig our canals and build our railroads. And thank God, there is work enough for all, and room enough for all, and food enough for all."
In the first half of the 19th century, the majority of immigrants hailed from Northern Europe. Very few came from the Italian peninsula. For example, for every Italian entering the country in 1850, there were almost 200 newcomers from Germany and nearly 400 from Ireland. Yet, within 50 years, Italian immigration would outpace that of any other country. What sparked this unprecedented flight from Italy, and would the arrival of so many immigrants put Seward's exuberant proclamation to the test? In 1861, Giuseppe Garibaldi and Victor Emmanuel united the fragmented states of the Italian peninsula, founding the Kingdom of Italy. From the start, the new nation was plagued with problems. Wars of independence added to the national debt, necessitating new taxes. The most hated was the macinato, or grist tax, which taxed the very bread that went into people's mouths. Reduced to poverty by harsh economic conditions, thousands of peasants abandoned their homeland. Emigration became a necessary evil. Asked why they chose to leave, the grim reply was, "We should have eaten each other had we stayed." On the 20th of May, 1872, a discussion in Italy's Chamber of Deputies degenerated into a debate about rising immigration. Confronting Prime Minister Giovanni Lanza, Deputy Guglielmo Tacci said,
"Minister, the Italians are leaving. Emigration is assuming frightening proportions. Have you studied this very serious social phenomenon that is occurring in Italy? Doesn't this seem worthy of your attention as a statesman?"
Taking up the cry of his peers, the editor of La Nuova Basilicata lamented the diaspora.
"There is nothing left but to watch the most painful spectacle of the day, the mass emigration to America."
A newspaperman in Pisa made the most compelling observation.
"America is described as a promised land where everyone makes a fortune. There is gold, the wages are high, the food is cheap, no taxes are paid. Who wouldn't go to America on these terms?"
On November 18, 1872, 532 Italians arrived in New York aboard the steamship Holland. Bernard Casserly, superintendent of the Castle Garden Immigration Bureau, could see that something was terribly wrong. Certain the passengers were victims of a scam, he persuaded them to file an affidavit. He also notified Italy's consul, the Italian ambassador, and U.S. Secretary of State Hamilton Fish. Weeks earlier, the Italians were scratching out a bare existence when self-styled ticket agents appeared in their villages.
They showed us all maps of Argentina and told us all about the country. You get rich there, very fast, they said. And no one works very hard. It is a fine country. You should sell everything, even your wife, and go there.
Exchanging household goods for passage, they began the first leg of their journey on foot. At Naples, they were shipped to Marseille and then by train to Le Havre on the north coast of France. At the dock, they found no ship going to Argentina. They were persuaded to take the Holland to New York and were promised that a southbound steamer would take them to Buenos Aires at no extra cost. The travelers agreed, but upon reaching New York, they learned that no such vessel awaited them. The immigrants slumped onto benches at the Castle Garden depot. At the bitter end of an arduous journey, they realized the bright promises that led them so far from their homes were nothing but empty, hollow lies.
Most prominent among the group was an aged father with a large family, who clung to him for encouragement and besought him for some explanation to tell them why they did not leave such cheerless quarters and seek that beautiful country which they had heard so much about. His agony appeared to be terrible, and he neither shed tears nor offered to his wife or children any words of cheer.
News of the swindle circulated through official channels. George Marsh, America's ambassador to Italy, posted warnings at major seaports. He also alerted the American consuls at Naples and Palermo, as well as the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Emilio Visconti Venosta. The chaos at Castle Garden escalated when two more ships, the Italy and the Queen, disembarked 900 more Italians. Like the others, they were victims of dishonest ticket brokers. But among their ranks lurked a dangerous new element. The banditti, Italian outlaws, had come to New York. The rumor that the Queen carried outlaws sparked a firestorm. It seemed as if the characters of legend had stepped from the pages of a book. They wore long cloaks, striped stockings, and peaked hats. Some were armed with stilettos. One reporter proclaimed,
The Italian emigrants arriving of late, and especially aboard the Queen, were some of them the most dreaded characters among the criminal classes of Europe.
At the heart of the fraud were crooked shipping agencies, the most villainous being the Turin-based Rocha, Padre, and Filio. On New Year's Day, 1873, 549 Italians entered New York on the steamship Erin, all victims of the Rocha group. One passenger described how he had been tricked by the firm's front man.
There was a man who came to them, who was also an agent of Rocha, father and son. He had been in America and wore fine clothes. The people of the district had never seen so grand a personage. He said he was very poor when he left Italy, and all one had to do was to go to America and come back rich. He was going to America to get more money, and had only returned to tell all his countrymen that they might secure some of the gold that could be dug out of the ground in that rich land. He got 20 to join him, who sold everything they had in the world to get money to pay their passage. This fine gentleman accompanied them to Turin, where he disappeared.
The plight of the immigrants required the attention of the commissioners at Castle Garden. To fill their immediate needs, the newcomers were lodged at the State Emigrant Refuge, on Ward's Island. Fed and housed at public expense, they hoped the authorities could get work for them. But finding jobs for people unable to speak or understand English would be no easy task. In the closing weeks of 1872, thousands of Italians deserted their homeland, desperate to find employment in America. False promises left the jobless immigrants stranded at Ward's Island, waiting and hoping for a chance to work. An unexpected opportunity came the day after Christmas, when the most powerful blizzard ever recorded buried the city under 18 inches of snow. Recruited to clear the streets, the Italians energetically set about the task, their first job since arriving in America.
The first honest penny these afflicted fugitives have yet earned in the land of the free came to them yesterday through the means of the beautiful snow. Every mother's son of them, able and willing to handle a shovel, made as much for half a day's work as he might expect to get for a month's labor in the land of his fathers. It was the grandest sight of shoveling the world ever saw.
In the wake of the next snowstorm, Public Works Superintendent Thomas Thorne hired 500 Italians to shovel the streets. Passers-by were amused to see ragged Italians endeavoring to clear away puddles with pickaxes. Yet they were pleased with the work. Thorne's praise of the men had a prophetic overtone.
He says they are a most excellent class of working men, able-bodied, diligent, faithful, polite, orderly, and exceedingly honest. He has never had to deal with laboring people with whom he has been better satisfied. In his opinion, we would have a very large immigration from Italy of this class, and he regards their coming as a great benefit to the country.
The Civil War left southern plantations short-handed. Thousands of farmers, joining the Confederate Army, died in the conflict and never returned to their fields. Virginia's governor, Gilbert Walker, planned to replace his lost farmhands with jobless immigrants from Castle Garden. However, a construction project in Richmond captured the public's attention and overturned Walker's plans. A group of Castle Garden Italians were enlisted, not as farmers, but to dig a railroad tunnel under the historic Church Hill district. A few days after their arrival, a journalist gave this assessment of their performance.
The 230 Italians who recently arrived here to work on the Chesapeake and Ohio Tunnel through Church Hill are likely to become permanent residents of Richmond, as they like it here, and we like them. They are excellent laborers.
Another Virginia editor offered his appraisal of the Italians.
They are generally able-bodied men, fine-looking men, polite, quiet, but good and industrious workmen, at lower wages than our people work for, and they are much liked by contractors than the people. They expect to locate permanently in Virginia and will make good citizens.
In 1872, a walkout by New York gas workers was called the most formidable calamity with which the city has been threatened. The following year, New Yorkers were nervous when the gas men promised another stoppage, but this time the owners had a secret weapon. When the gas men struck on the 5th of April, 60 Italians, Swiss and Germans were hired from Ward's Island as replacements. More were quickly signed up, and within days the standoff collapsed.
The wretched Italians had supplanted the regular and skilled gasmen, and had furnished a temporary expedient to beat strikes. Could any other force have triumphed over this strike? It is safe to say no.
The industrialists had played a trump card no one had seen coming.
The Italians have again been taken from the care of the state, and over 100 of them placed in an employment where they will be able to earn their own bread and raiment. Ward's Island thus proves a terror to strikers.
The use of Italians as strikebreakers was a successful tactic in the struggle between capital and labor. However, the strategy exposed them to great danger. The recruitment of Italian immigrants as coal miners marked a turbulent episode in their integration into American society. They were first introduced to the coal fields in March 1873, when 100 of them replaced strikers in Coalburg, a mining camp near Youngstown, Ohio. The success in Coalburg prompted managers in nearby Liberty Township to hire 100 Italians to replace strikers there. Threats and abuse followed, and after the strike failed, violence against the Italians reached a climax. On July 27, 1873, 200 Scottish and Welsh miners surrounded a shanty housing 8 Italians. Setting fire to the house, the antagonists waited at the windows and doors with weapons ready. Fleeing the inferno, the Italians were attacked by the mob, who inflicted appalling wounds. The last man out of the blazing ruin was 20-year-old Giovanni Chiesa, who was beaten to death. He was the first Italian lynched in the United States. Despite the tragedy, coal operators continued to enlist Italians, especially during strikes, and it was clear the owners had more than one reason for hiring them. John Sinney, president of the Miners' National Association, declared,
"The importation of Italians and others with no mining experience, and who could not mine coal without a loss, was part of a scheme of the operators to exhaust the funds of the strikers."
Nowhere in the country was coal mining more important than in Pennsylvania. Throughout the 19th century, the state's production far outstripped the combined outputs of all other states, and it was here Italian miners suffered most terribly at the hands of strikers. During their first year in New York, the defrauded immigrants remained isolated and had little success finding permanent jobs. But in March 1874, they joined a work-for-hire agency called the Italian Cooperative Laborers, whose enterprising leader was Frederick Gussetti. In September, 1,500 miners struck the coal banks on the Panhandle Railroad near Pittsburgh. Soon, 200 of Gussetti's Italians arrived at the pits. In addition to picks and shovels, they were given guns. The strikers were furious. In the dark of night, 50 armed men crept toward the Italian encampment, unaware that Gussetti's men were waiting for them. The assailants fired into shacks occupied by the wives and children of the immigrants. When the light from a passing train swept across the attackers, the defenders fired back. The raiders retreated, but their determination to oust the aliens was undiminished. The editor of the National Labor Tribune, vehemently opposed to the Italian presence, declared,
"Not a bushel of coal should be dug until every last greasy wretch is sent out of the county. The operators who have imported them should be blacklisted, and not a bushel of coal allowed to be taken from their banks for 6 months after the Italians are expelled."
Charles Armstrong operated mines in Westmoreland and Allegheny counties. On October 19th, he fired his men and hired Bussetti's team. After a month of hostility, several hundred locals marched to the Italian camp. The mob started a day-long shootout, killing 3 Italians. Late in the afternoon, Bussetti's wife walked boldly into the line of fire, seeking a truce. The shooting instantly stopped. The next day, the Italians left the county. During their first year in America, the swindled Italians struggled to find work. But the economy was changing, and businessmen increasingly engaged them to replace rank-and-file workers. The newcomers had finally gained a foothold in their adopted homeland. Federico Auguste Bartholdi's monumental sculpture, Liberty Enlightening the World, has welcomed immigrants to New York since 1886. Better known as the Statue of Liberty, she is a towering symbol of American opportunity. Her pedestal is inscribed with Emma Lazarus's famous verse.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
In 1872, the statue had not yet been created, nor had Lazarus penned her inspiring composition, when throngs of Italians poured into a nation that was unprepared to receive them. But their unforeseen arrival proved advantageous to employers seeking cheap labor. Driven by American industry, Italian immigration surged, and by the dawn of the 20th century, it exceeded that of all other nations. At great personal risk, Italians were thrust between capital and labor. Initially, their entry into the workplace was met with violence. Gradually, however, the immigrants earned the respect of their American counterparts. In the ensuing years, Italians would mine our coal, forge our iron, and pave our roads. They found work enough, room enough, and food enough in America. Less than a mile from the Statue of Liberty, a plaque on Ellis Island speaks to the pursuit of the American dream. Some think the words were spoken by an Italian immigrant for whom reality replaced hope. Whether fact or legend, the remarks are symbolic of the certainties faced by millions of Italians, lured from their homes by the bright promise of the New World.
Well, I came to America because I heard the streets were paved with gold. When I got here, I found out 3 things. First, the streets weren't paved with gold. Second, they weren't paved at all. And third, I was expected to pave them.